many different ways, doing all of the major temple office jobs like Eno and Tenzo and some other things. And increasingly, he's doing more teaching as he moves along in his path and does talks on Tuesday nights. And he's currently co-leading a fall practice period with me, and we're teaching from the Platform Sutra. And immediately after practice period, he's going to leave for Japan, where he will spend 30 days in Toshoji Monastery. So that's pretty exciting. And welcome, Evan. Good morning. Good morning. Hello, people online. Hello, everybody in the room. It's good to see all of you. You know, this is wild. This is my first Sunday talk, which means that it's my first time sitting on the platform. And it's also my first time drinking out of this fancy cup. So I'm getting off my leash, I think. And as I first sat down on this platform, I was like, wow, it's a little scary. It's a little scary. I thought, you know, may I not puff up, and may I also not shrink down. So here I am, prepared to talk to you today. So as Ted mentioned, we are currently going through practice period. We're about halfway through, which is an interesting arc within practice period, about halfway through. And it's about the Platform Sutra. So I wanted today's talk to be tangentially related to the Platform Sutra. It just seemed like a good idea. So what I decided to do was consider the Platform Sutra, consider what other possible tie-ins there might be for a talk today. And so the Platform Sutra, for those of you who are not aware, is about the transmission of the robe from the 5th patriarch to the 6th patriarch and the 6th patriarch's teachings. And the Platform Sutra begins with a question, which is the essence of practice, is the essence of Zen, that of, are we polishing the dust off of the mirror of the mind? Or does dust not exist the way that we consider dust to exist? So what are we doing when we practice? Is it that we're clearing the mirror of hindrances and impediments and difficulties? Or is it that we see the clear radiant mirror and there's no dust whatsoever? The person who proposed the second approach, that of there is no dust after all, ended up becoming the 6th patriarch. So you might be able to say that this person won. Or another way of looking at it is this particular person completed the first poem. Completed the first poem. Without this turn, the first poem is incorrect. Poem being the first approach. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I can spend a little bit of time with Hongren, which is Hui Neng's teacher. And so in typical fashion, I totally overdid it. I did a lot of research on Hongren and tried to figure out, okay, what were Hongren's teachings? What did Hongren have to offer? Who is this person after all? And what is this person's relationship to Hui Neng? And I really got in the weeds. I mean, I was really, I got carried away. I ended up finding a text that was cultivating the essentials of cultivating the mind and the treatise of the supreme vehicle. And I couldn't quite figure out if these were the same or if they were different, but they were certainly attributed to Hongren. And so then I was doing more research and I was like, well, certainly I'll familiarize myself with these and then maybe I'll find a couple tidbits from this and then I'll give a talk on that. And then I realized, yeah, I'm doing it again. In the weeds. So I ended up finding an encounter story between Hongren and his teacher. And that will be kind of the basis of this talk today. So the story, and I'm going to read it twice. And you can just kind of let it in. So Daoshan, which is Hongren's teacher, Daoshan, upon meeting Hongren, asked the young man his family name. "What is your nature?" Hongren said, "My nature is not ordinary. It is Buddha nature." Daoshan said, "Don't you have a family name?" Hongren said, "No, for the teachings say our nature is empty." Daoshan transmitted the teachings in the robe to Hongren. Daoshan, upon meeting Hongren, asked the young man his family name. "What is your nature?" Hongren said, "My nature is not ordinary. It is Buddha nature." Daoshan said, "Don't you have a family name?" Hongren, "No, for the teachings say our nature is empty." Daoshan transmitted the teachings in the robe to Hongren. This is a pretty cool story. So one thing that's really interesting about this story is the Chinese pronunciation of family name and nature are the same, but they have different meanings. So Hongren deliberately interpreted "what is your family name" as "what is your nature," and said, "Well, my nature is Buddha nature." Deliberately misinterpreted it. My nature is Buddha nature. And then Daoshan thought, well, okay, I'll give this guy another chance. "What is your family name?" And he said, "My nature is empty. My nature is emptiness." So after I pulled myself out of the weeds, I wasn't completely out of the weeds, I was still quite in the weeds. I decided, okay, I'm going to give a talk on Buddha nature. So I like to spend a little bit of time exploring Buddha nature. And these are simply ways to look at Buddha nature. So I'm not saying this is what Buddha nature is, and I have it. What I'm saying is these are ways to look at Buddha nature. And really the question to ask yourself as we're going through this is, how do I relate to this Buddha nature? How do I relate to so-called my Buddha nature? How do I relate to the Buddha nature of all beings? So Buddha nature, Buddhata in Sanskrit, or Busho in Japanese. It's also the third chapter of Dogen's Shobo Genzo, Busho. So what is Buddha nature? Buddha nature could be said that it's the notion that all beings possess the ability to become Buddha. All beings possess the ability to become Buddha. You could also say that it's the aspect of our being that is already Buddha. The aspect of our being that is already Buddha. Or maybe aspect is still too small. And it is that which is Buddha already, which is not an aspect, which is how it is, emptiness, the whole deal. So we'll see later that there are a number of takes. Ultimately, this is a take that Dogen takes. So it's described as a potentiality. So Buddha nature is described as potentiality. So sometimes it's described as a seed. And with a seed, we water it, provide appropriate conditions, sunlight, nutriments, and then this seed begins to grow. So it's a potentiality. It can be watered, developed, cultivated, grown. Also, ways that it is looked at as a potentiality. There are two Mahayana sutras that look at this as a jewel, a precious jewel, or a treasure. In one story from the Lotus Sutra, there's a precious jewel sewed within a poor person's robe, someone who is destitute, really struggling. And this person has no idea this jewel is sewn in his robe. But either way, the jewel is still there. But until this person sees that the jewel is there, it doesn't actually have any value. It can't actually help this person. And then also in the Nirvana Sutra, one of the ways that it's related to is a precious treasure that's buried somewhere. Same story, somebody who really could use the treasure, use the precious treasure, but it's hidden. And so in this story, a good friend comes and says, well, here's the treasure. You've had it all along. And now it has value. So we possess it, and yet we don't know that we possess it. However, when we know that we have it, it immediately has value and can be put to use. So that's maybe a way that we can talk about this as a potentiality. So in the first example, Buddha nature is a seed, something that's watered, developed, grows on its own. I really like agricultural metaphors because I like to will, I like to push. And so seeds, they grow on their own. And I heard this example relatively recently of, if you plant corn and you're constantly trying to pull on your corn in order to get it to grow, eventually you're gonna uproot it. So it's a potential that we water and it grows on its own, or it's something that we already possess in full, and upon realizing it, it has tremendous value. So a potentiality and an actuality. So if it's something that we have, what properties does Buddha nature have? If it's something that we already possess, what properties does Buddha nature have? We know that it's I do this sometimes, I lose my spot. Hold on one second. Okay, there it is. So, well, it's considered both a treasure and a gem and a seed. Treasure, precious, has value, precious, rare. And if something is precious and rare, upon finding it, the implication is that we know immediately that it has value. Immediately. If it's precious and it's rare, upon encountering, we see its value. We don't wonder like, what is this rock in my pocket? It's like, oh, this is value. Some sources say that Buddha nature is neither good nor bad nor neutral. Neither good nor bad nor neutral. So Buddha nature doesn't make us inherently good from the standpoint of being inherently bad. It doesn't make us inherently neutral from the standpoint of being inherently good. So neither good nor bad nor neutral. It's beyond our conventional notions of good, bad, and neutral. Transparently, I was a little dissatisfied with that. With neither good nor bad nor neutral. So that sounds a little dry. But one way that feels true is that if it doesn't mean that we're fundamentally good, perhaps a better way of saying this is it does mean that we're fundamentally, inherently worthy, noble, upright, complete, full, enough. Perhaps that is the suggestion of Buddha nature. So with all life, fundamentally worthy. Good and bad are opposed to one another. they create one another. So we're not moving from a place of badness, brokenness, in need of deep repair, to somehow good and then finally complete already, full already. Buddha nature shining luminously, whether it's sewn into our robe or in the palm of our hand. So sometimes we think about, well, we're moving from delusion to awakening. Moving from delusion to awakening. So remember the poem contest that I referenced in the beginning. You can see that that's embedded within it. So is the essence of our practice that we're dusting the mirror, removing the dust of our impediments, removing the dust of our defilements to reveal the luminous mirror that is underneath all of the dust and the defilements? Or is it that the dust and the defilements don't actually exist in the way that we think they do? Somebody during practice period said, yeah, even if a mirror is pretty dusty, you can still see yourself in it. That was quite excellent. That was quite excellent. Platform Sutra says, our nature is pure like the clear sky above. Our wisdom is like the sun and the moon. Our wisdom is always shining. But if externally we become attached to objects, the clouds of delusion cover up our nature and we can't see it. So our pure nature is like the clear sky. And as human beings, it's really easy to mistake the clouds for who we are. I don't think we'd probably be in this room if we didn't mistake the clouds for our true nature. This practice helps us reorient to our Buddha nature for even just a moment. Oh yeah. In Hongren's opening line of Essentials of Cultivating the Mind, remember this is when I was in the weeds, still in the weeds. The essence of cultivating the way is to discern that one's own body-mind awareness is inherently pure, not subject to birth or death, and was without division. Perfect and complete in its self-nature, present awareness is the fundamental teacher. One's own body-mind awareness is inherently pure. Inherently pure. So we'll let that in. That this very body, this very mind, inherently pure. Buddha nature. Hongren, in his encounter story, equated Buddha nature with emptiness. So emptiness, we talk a lot about that in this tradition. Emptiness is no thing. Emptiness is profound interconnection. Emptiness is nothing can exist on its own. Buddha nature, in this case, is the very ground of our being. So it's not something that we possess, but rather something that we are. Buddha nature. So as I mentioned, it seems to resonate with Dogen's take, who much later came and said, well, it's not a potential as a seed. It's not a potential as a jewel sewn into our robe. And once we have it, it has value. But actually, Buddha nature is everything. Everything is Buddha nature. Ted, during practice period, encouraged us during our meditations to see everything that arises as Buddha. It's a practice invitation. So no matter what arises, can we see it as Buddha? Old ache in the heart. I see that as Buddha. Spot in the back that will not give up. I see that as Buddha. So what does that do for us? The joy that arises, can I see that as Buddha? What does that do for us? Well, it challenges our typical mode of being in the world, which is to say this belongs and this doesn't. This is good, this is bad. My meditation is good when good things arise, and the meditation is bad when bad things arise. Just to say, no matter what arises, this is Buddha too. And then it's Buddha encountering Buddha. And whether there's a notion or a sense that Buddha's encountering Buddha, Buddha's encountering Buddha. So Jewel's already there. Everything is already Buddha nature. So is it a potentiality, Buddha nature? Or is it an actuality? Suzuki Roshi, the founder of this temple, said, Buddha is not something separate from us. When we use the term Buddha, it seems to us that Buddha is far from us and we think we are not Buddha. That is a great misunderstanding. We are Buddha. Buddha means we become something more than a human being. We become a great being from whom the light of our personality as a whole is given forth. It's given forth. So how does Buddha nature relate to our everyday practice, our everyday experience? And how do we experience Buddha nature? In our practice, we behold this very life, this very body, this very mind, in a reverential, kind, expansive kind of way. Where is Buddha nature while that activity is so-called happening? Where is Buddha nature? Or when we're interacting with a coworker or a friend, we find ourselves shifting into that familiar defensive pattern. We sense it, we're close to it, and we choose not to go there. Where's Buddha nature there? Or maybe we go there, but we don't go there in the same way that we've gone there before. Where's Buddha nature there? So we practice sitting, exposing our hearts to the light of awareness, inherent Buddha nature. And somehow this Buddha nature takes care of us. So maybe using the seed analogy, watering, and it grows on its own. So Buddha nature can take care of us. So Buddha nature can take care of us. So returning to the encounter story, I really like this story because it's not how we ordinarily interact in the world. Somebody asks who you are, usually you say your name. Usually you say maybe what you're up to, what you've been cooking lately, what you've been watching lately. And I would encourage you to continue to interact with people in that way. But usually what we bring to the table is who it is that we think we are, or who it is that we think the other person wants us to be. That's usually what we bring to the table. But Hongren, very young, there's a couple different ages that were given for Hongren in the story. One of them was 7 years old when he had this encounter and said this, which is humorous to me, maybe. Another one was 10, another was 14. And I chose 14 just because I think, like, well, when I was 14, my primary occupation was figuring out who I was in the world. You know? I liked listening to American Head Charge's new album. I liked lifting weights. I liked doing crafts. I got into like doing little plastic car models for a long time. It was very fun. So those are the ways in which I would have spoke myself into the world. But for the sake of this talk and the sake of this topic, this 14-year-old kid said, well, actually, I'm Buddha nature. That's who I am. I'm Buddha nature. And the teacher, I would imagine, maybe inwardly rolls his eyes and says, yeah, okay, but your family name, please? I'd like to know. And he is insistent. He says, yeah, my nature is emptiness. That's who I am. And then the robe and the bowl is transmitted. And what I learned was that Hongren ended up living with his teacher until his teacher passed away. So they actually formed a very close bond and became really good buds, really good fellow practitioners for the rest of Daoshen's life. And then Hongren took over temple, moved to East Mountain, set up a new temple. So that encounter is kind of the beginning of a lifelong friendship. So within this story, there's these really amazing, interesting ways of looking at things. Like, how do we usually speak ourselves into the world? Do we lead with our smallness? Do we lead with our puffed upness? No, may I not shrink down, may I not puff up? Or is it possible to lead with our Buddha nature? To interact with the world with this quiet, spacious, luminous, incredibly kind Buddha nature? Is that possible? And can we develop lifelong friendships? Can we have relationships that really matter? So it challenges our expectations of how to answer the question and how we typically move in the world. I'm remembering a line from Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi that says, with practice hidden, like a fool, like an idiot. With practice hidden, like a fool, like an idiot. Keeping our practice hidden. We don't need to puff up because we have a special cup. We can keep our practice hidden. And when we keep it hidden, the jewel sewn into our robe, it's also radiant. And we can relate to people about what we're watching, what we're cooking, what we're eating. And the luminous Buddha nature can be there with us. Shunryu Suzuki said, to live in the realm of Buddha nature means to die as a small being moment after moment. To live in the realm of Buddha nature means to die as a small being moment after moment. So perhaps we can imagine Hongren encouraging us. You are your Buddha nature. And your Buddha nature is emptiness, which is everything. You are your Buddha nature. So how do we live in a way in which we can accept the invitation to live as Buddhas in this very life, in this very world? And that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening. I want to open it up for comments and questions. I'm interested to hear, what are your experiences of your Buddha nature?
First of all, thank you for the talk. I think I have a question, various and stages. When you talk about Buddha nature, what hit me was that Buddha nature is life affirming. And the way that I got to that is I grew up Catholic. In Catholicism, you're born with original sin, basically. well, I interpret it, you're broken. And there's only one way that you can be unbroken. And it seems to me that it becomes a master-slave relationship. So I guess the question for me is, could you speak a little bit more of, is Buddha nature being life affirming?
Buddha nature being life affirming.
And maybe I'm wrong, maybe it isn't.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that qualifier to everything that I've said too. Yeah, Buddha nature is life affirming. I feel like we could probably have a really long discussion about this. I think what's coming to mind for me is two things. The first is, which is not directly answering your question, but I think it's helpful, is it's very common to have a sense of, and I'm not saying that this is what you have, I'm just saying that it's common to have a sense of not enoughness, of brokenness, of I'm actually, I hear all this Buddhist stuff about being completely whole, and I feel completely shattered. So then what? Which was actually the rub for me with the not good, not bad, not neutral. So in some sense, it can be really helpful to spend time with. I actually am worthy. I actually am inherently good. I actually am. If that is the orientation, it can be extraordinarily helpful to spend time cultivating. I recognize my own goodness, my own worthiness. I see it. I see it in other people. It's pointing directly back at me. So, and then to answer your question, is life affirming? It makes me think of the precepts. I vow not to kill. And it's like we take these precepts to remember how to be Buddhas in the world. And then at some point, this practice orients us, and not at some point, like, one day, but at some point, like maybe a minute from now, maybe right now, maybe 2 minutes ago. At some point, it orients us to a different way of being that actually is affirming the life, that actually is not violent, actually is already. So affirming of life, absolutely, absolutely. I see people who sat on cushions for years, who began, myself included, was fairly troubled to fairly steady, to fairly just naturally joyous and wonderful. So I think calling Buddha nature as affirming of life is really quite wonderful. I endorse this view.
It seems to me like Buddha nature is life, not just affirming of life.
A lot of wisdom in the room.
So when you were saying not puff up, but not get small, right? And I like going into the weeds too, and researching and coming back with, ooh, look what I found.
Yeah, right.
And feeling, but there's a lot of passion there. Right? There's like an innate, ooh, there's joy and motivation. So how do you balance for you when you're doing this talk? How do you balance? Here's what I found about Buddha nature without feeling like you're puffing yourself up.
Without feeling like what?
Knowing more than you know, or still wanting to convey that passion for what you do.
That's such an interesting question. Well, my experience of giving talks in the past is sometimes I give a talk and it just feels like, yep, that was, didn't really feel like there was anything extra. And then sometimes I give a talk and then the next day it's like, oh, I can't believe. So it's yet to be seen. But I think what this practice helps us to do is move from conceptual and reactivity to intuitive and spacious. That feels a little weird. Too intuitive. Maybe it's spacious, but it's easy to get caught on all these kinds of things. So, in our practice, really, we sit on a cushion just being tremendously honest. Like, this is what is here right now. This is what is arising for me. All of these old tendencies, and impulses, frustrations, excitements. We get to see them pretty regularly. In the same way that Hongren developed a long-term relationship with Daoshin and became best buds, befriending even the parts of ourselves that we don't particularly enjoy, which helps us to kind of intuitively adjust internally to how we're moving in the world. I hope that's helpful.
Heidi has her hand up.
Oh, thanks. Hey, Heidi, go ahead.
Thank you. So just to say quickly, I'm in your practice period, and part of the text that stuck with me is you already possess the prajna wisdom of enlightenment, but because you're deluded, you can't understand yourself. You need to find a good friend to show you the way. And what's interesting, as a beginning meditator, I sometimes get caught in the because I'm deluded, I can't understand myself. And I find that exasperating. But with your practice period exercise, one of the things you had us do is when thoughts come up, this too is Buddha. And that just kind of brought me back to one of your statements from today, is the potentiality versus the actuality of Buddha nature. And I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that any further or delineate that any further or had any comments on any of this.
Well, actuality and potentiality, I mean, my sense is that it's both. My sense is that it's both. And we live as human beings, and so our tendency is towards dualistic thinking. There's good, there's bad, there's good meditations, there's bad meditations. And what you said about you already possess Mahaprajna Paramita, I really appreciate that. Seems like Buddha nature, as both an actuality and a potentiality. I think just as a potential practice prompt, practice invitation is, where are you in your practice? Are you in a place where familiar patterns are gnawing away? You can feel them reaching for the steering wheel. And perhaps it's helpful to remember, well, maybe the question is actually better put this way. When you feel those tendencies reaching for the steering wheel, what's a helpful frame? Actuality or potentiality? Is it more helpful to have a sense of Buddha nature is actually already here, and I'm not this limited belief, I'm not this limited impulse? Or is it helpful to remember that it's a potentiality, that this is my situation right now. And Buddha nature potential is here. What is it that I'm going to water? So maybe that can be helpful as just a way to practice with this. How's that, Heidi?
That's very helpful. And it kind of reminds me of the poem you opened up with is, was I dusting the mirror or manifesting the truth that there's no dust? It's kind of in some way in my mind related to that, because it's related to how you practice. Are you looking at it as potentiality or actuality? I don't know, but thank you so much. That was helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great, Heidi. Yeah. And I think it's both. I think it's both.
You mentioned Buddha nature taking care of us. Can you talk about that some more? Because when you said that, my mouth kind of dropped open. And I'm like, what? So I'm asking you, what?
Yeah, Buddha nature taking care of us. I'm thinking about the title of the Shinshin Ming, Trust and Heart Mind. So we can trust in our experience. We can be fully present with our experience. And Buddha nature will take care of it on its own. You know, when we're sitting and a difficult emotion arises, sometimes there's this sense of like, oh, it'd be helpful to cultivate a sense of calm, a sense of well-being. And sometimes there's the sense of just bearing the whole thing, in which it's Buddha nature, taking care of the whole show, resting and trusting the heart. Yep. Barbara.
The mirror analogy. I like to think of it this way. Both dust in the mirror and the clean mirror are perfect, bright and good. And as we look at the mirror, we see the dust. But then the mirror, as it looks out, sees only beautiful nature, as beautiful as the sun. So that's what I think it looks like.
It's really nice, Barbara. Thanks. It's also nice to hear you say that with the leaves falling behind you and the sun rolling in.
Speaking
Pretty
of that,
good.
I feel like looking out the window and telling yourself that the trees are in the way of something.
It's great. Yeah, I do that too sometimes. Like, this would be a great picture if that wasn't there. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe a couple more. Jamie.
This invitation to try greeting everything that comes up as Buddha has been helpful for me. It reminds me of one of my favorite parts of the Lotus Sutra, which is never disrespectful Bodhisattva, who goes around saying you are Buddha to everybody, and this annoys a bunch of people. They start throwing things at him and being like, boo! And even when they do that, he's like, you're Buddha. One way that's been really helpful for me lately is a thing that has been really alive for me in my practice is the parts of me that are pretty mean to me. And sometimes in the past when that comes up, the mean part that's saying mean things to me comes up, I'm like, stop, go away. And that doesn't work very well. I find when I'm like, weirdly, when I'm like, okay, you're Buddha too. I don't know, that feels better. Still playing with it, but I offer.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Does that resonate with people?
All right.
I like how you ended with, that feels better. And this is the intuition that I was attempting to reference earlier. It's like, oh yeah, this feels better.
Building off of that a little bit, like, I also have had a lot of those same thoughts about my like inner negative monologue. And I think coming from the same source, the judgmental, like inner thoughts of how other people are doing things, that I tend to critique myself of, I'm doing the same thing. And, you know, I kind of realize that most of the time, I feel like that's coming from a space of like, especially maybe when I was younger, like not having been seen or listened to. So yeah, just literally acknowledging it. I think, you know, saying like you are Buddha, kind of the same idea as like, I like to visualize myself now, just like seeing and not looking away from maybe like the inner child that's saying that, or maybe hugging them if it's coming from a place of like, you know, non-acceptance or something like that. And yeah, just pretty consistently like quiets it down. So, you know, like the saying you are Buddha, I think is a really nice way of just acknowledging presence without any rejection whatsoever, no matter where it's coming from or what the intent is.
Yeah, thank you. That's so nice. That's so nice. Yeah, your comment was complete. I just want to say that, and I'm going to riff a little. Yeah, I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this talk. You know, it's like meditation 101 that we have to keep learning over and over again is mindfully encountering what's arising in a non-judgmental way. Because our habit is to judge what arises. And I really appreciated what you said about having the courage just to see. So meditation 101 is really practicing Buddha nature 101. We talk about it as just like this simple kind of like exercise that we go through. You just got to wrap this out for a long time. But it's also Buddha nature. And I also just so love what you said. It was very imagistic for me of, you know, like seeing these parts that weren't seen enough, seeing these parts that feel incomplete or are judgmental or harsh, and just having the willingness to look. And a question arises for me when thinking about that. What in that is Buddha nature? Is it the you that's looking at all these parts? Or is the you that is looking at all these parts also being beheld by something? So just playing here. Like, I don't want to get too carried away with any particular view. Could be fun. Yeah, thanks. All right. We have time for one more, and then I gotta wrap up. Please. Oh yeah.
Okay, so before the talk, I had a question arise for me. I was already thinking about Buddha nature as we came up with the talk, and I didn't know the topic, but I was practicing meditation, trying to deal with all of the thoughts going through my head, and I would have moments of concentration on my breath and just nothing. And so my question had become, well, how do I actively practice Buddha nature? And your talk actually kind of answered it, so I didn't really have a question at the end of the talk, but the piece that answered it for me was the analogy with the sun and the moon always shining and the clouds being our delusion. And that also tied in with your response about looking at things, is Buddha nature potentiality or is it actuality? And I'm like, this analogy is just perfect for me, because with the sun and the moon, we all know internally that the sun is still shining when the clouds are out there. And yet, I think for me right now in my practice, it's the potentiality of just when I'm sitting there and I have these thoughts while I'm meditating and I only see 2 seconds of clearness. For me right now, it is thinking, the potentiality of it's there, the clouds could move away and that sun is still there. So your talk was so rich. I think it was amazing. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for sharing your answer. Well, that's all. I think at this point I turn it over to Raymond. I just want to say thank you so much.